And so you were up in the clouds. Some mornings the clouds would be low and you'd be up in a sea of clouds. So it was a Shangri-La, like a little Shambhala. And it was mine. Work hard, meet people without fear, meditate, and play. I mean, those were the 4 credos of his path. But my guru said to me that he goes, Sadhu life looks romantic, but within a few months you'll understand. And within a few months of living with the sadhus, I became ill. And much like in the Western psychological field, the ego isn't something to be destroyed or suppressed. It's something to be cultivated. It's something to be understood and purified in a sense. We call it sattva buddhi. I encourage people to adopt the Ayurvedic path as a part of their healing process and learn from it. It will always benefit you.
Vishnu Das. He's an Ayurvedic practitioner practicing here in Asheville, North Carolina. He's also a lead instructor at the Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor Program at the Asheville School of Massage and Yoga. He trained directly under Vasant Lad over 20 years ago and has been practicing for over 15 years. I found Vishnu because my girlfriend and partner, Brooke, who you've heard about on the podcast, she's currently enrolled in the Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor Program. And I've been following along in her studies, and we've learned a great deal about health, much of it from Vishnu himself. He's an outstanding teacher. And he also has a very interesting life history. I really enjoyed him sharing his story about his travels across America into India, and he shared many of his life lessons that he learned along the way. It's a fascinating history. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Vishnu Das. Yeah, that's your guacamole recipe there. I haven't even tried it yet. Looking forward to that.
I guess we can have it a break.
Yeah. Comes straight from the cookbook. So have you always been interested in cooking?
I've been into cooking ever since I was a boy, I think. I mean, I don't think I was a Betty Crocker in the kitchen. I mean, I liked to try to make things, I was pretty independent as a kid growing up. So I had a lot of opportunity to make my own food.
Uh-huh.
And, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I can't say that all of that food was really healthy food by any means, but it would be a curiosity with recipes. I think the first recipe that I tried was fortune cookies. I'd always like to help my mom, especially baking. I think it was licking the beaters that was the enticement to want to bake.
Yeah, that was always a treat.
Yeah, but I do like cooking a lot, and I think it's grown over the years, especially with the study of Ayurveda. It required more attention to the types of food I was eating, and that does require that you make your own food more often than you eat out. I mean, we enjoy eating out, but the quality of it, the care that goes into making it, and the end result is different. And no matter how good the restaurant is, whenever we sit at home and we look at what we create, sometimes just out of leftovers or the last few things in the cupboard, it's always amazing what we come up with.
Yeah, why is that? Why is food? What is it about food that's prepared at home that tastes better, or is better for you than restaurant food?
Well, for one, it doesn't come off the Cisco truck.
Yeah,
and two, I think that it is just the attention that we put into our own food, intention and attention. And in a restaurant, even the best chefs, they have to kick out a lot of orders, and they do it and they love it. And, it definitely shows when you go to a good restaurant with chefs that put a lot of attention into their food, but it is still different than just creating your own meal. And especially if you have others to create it with, I mean, that's a nice thing too. You're making it together, you're sharing it together, and sitting around the kitchen table and your own home, and if you become accustomed to that and you do it on a regular basis, you see the effect it has on your health to put your own love and care into your cooking.
Yeah. Well, I should say right off the bat, first off, thank you for coming on the podcast today and being a guest, because this has been a difficult year for you. Brooke is in your Ayurveda program, and so I've been following along what's been going on this year with you, and you're grieving, and I want to again extend my condolences.
Thanks. Yeah, having lost my sister, she was 54. She was a yoga teacher. She was very, very close. We were extremely close. She was one of those people that just really loved what she did. First off, just being a mom and a wife. And in the prime of her life, she was really healthy. She was really energetic. She was a type A, but in a really, I would say, in the most positive sense.
What was your sister's name?
Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen.
Yeah. And she was a yoga teacher. She had been certified as a yoga teacher many years ago, and she was an avid yoga student for over a decade. And she raised a Down syndrome child, and that's a high stress job. Raising a Down syndrome child is a gift, and it's a lot of work, a lot of logistics, a lot of just back and forth to the doctors, and so much special education and programs and retreats. I mean, she did it all, and you think that as you're doing it for your health, or you're doing it for whatever reason. We enter this path of wellness, and then you get blindsided by something like that. And how should I say? I mean, it's a humbling experience to witness, and but at the same time, it has brought me to a different place within myself. Just having dealt with that whole process, just watching the decline and the grieving, but there's a lot of beauty there too. The supportive family, the connectedness that my extended family, and being with my relatives, and you really become reminded of our own mortality and temporary nature of existence, and so the appreciation for those that survive, for the loved one, and having been around my family during that time, it was a real gift.
Right.
So, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and this is still real early in the grieving process for you, just a few weeks old. And,
she passed on April 15th. I do believe it was April 15th, and it was about just a few days after I had shoulder surgery, so I was kind of in a cloud of that, and at the same time dealing with that.
Right.
Life comes in waves.
Yes, it does. And sometimes the waves come together.
Yeah.
My dad passed last September, so it's still fairly fresh with me, the experience of the loss and that pain, but also, like you said, how there is a healing process that goes on that's just kind of all around you in the grief, the process of family coming together and kind of putting aside differences and coming together to share in the grieving process and share in the celebration of the loved one's life. So Yeah, there's a lot to be learned and experienced in the grief. Yeah.
A good friend of mine said to me the other night, something that hurts as bad as losing a loved one, it's not without purpose and without some real significance. And we all grieve differently. Some grieve on the surface and some grieve in a silent way, but it's very real. I experienced that with one of my relatives who he grieves in his own way, in a more internal way, but but it's still very real and very connected and heartfelt. We all express it and experience it in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's unavoidable at the same time. The process, you're just kind of amongst it, and it's however you deal with it in your individual way. Yeah.
It brings us closer to our own mortality and
definitely
acceptance of life as it is and how it will be for all of us, really. So we move closer to that, like George Harrison says, the art of dying. The art of living. The art of dying, yeah.
Wow, I keep hearing more and more George Harrison quotes in the process of doing this podcast. He had a lot of wisdom.
Oh yeah, he was a good brother.
Yeah. So that kind of brings to mind the notion of the wounded healer, the archetype that we inhabit at different times, or in that process we learn more about healing from our own wounds and as we're going through the healing process ourselves. But you've been in this healing journey as a practitioner for quite a while, and we're going to get into your experience as an Ayurveda practitioner. But why don't we take it back to the beginning, to childhood and where you're from?
I was born in Naperville, Illinois.
Okay.
I have the only memory I have of Naperville was being 1 year old. And I truly believe that I had this experience, and there's a picture to show for it. But it was just a picture of sitting in a grassy lawn near a little baby pool. And I, for some reason, have this memory etched into my mind, deep down. But yeah, there's really no memory of that.
Well, you have a singular experience of maybe the feel of the grass or the light.
I was behind my eyes at that period in time, sitting in a grassy lawn. But that was just a short period, and we moved to Boston. Massachusetts. Yeah. Well, actually outside Boston. We moved to the suburbs of Boston.
Yeah.
And my grandmother and grandfather were, on my mother's side, were immigrants. They were Italian, Sicilian. My grandmother was actually born in the United States, and when she was 1 year old, her mother really couldn't adjust to life in the States and moved back to Italy. But then before the war, or right as the war broke out, my grandmother was sent over with one of her relatives who was young too. I believe maybe they were 16 and they were young. And so she came over with Kay and, my grandmother, Mary, and they were seamstresses outside of Boston. So, and my grandfather was also immigrated over here on my mom's side.
Okay.
And so we had family there, and my father's family is from there as well.
Okay.
And so I grew up outside of Boston until I was about 18, and I started venturing further and further away from home on my own hero's journey.
Sure.
And, coming back for short periods of time that led to longer periods of time away. By the time I was 20, I was, permanently away from home as far as living is concerned.
But that's where you grew up, was the Boston area and suburbs. It was you and one sister?
Two sisters.
Okay.
Yeah. And Mary Ellen and Kathy.
And Kathy's...
Kathy still lives in Georgetown.
Is she older or younger?
She's a little bit older than me.
So you're the youngest? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. The baby boy.
Baby boy.
Yeah. And were your parents together?
Until I was a young boy.
Yeah.
5 or 6. Yeah.
And what did they do?
My mom was I believe she did secretarial work after the divorce. Before then, she was a mom.
Yeah.
And a housewife.
Yeah.
And then she remarried, and my father remarried as well. And my father passed away, several years ago now of pancreatic cancer. And but my mom is, still 75 years old and exercising and golfing and doing Zumba and all, full of energy.
Yeah. She's still up in the Boston area?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you've got 2 older sisters, and it was the 3 of y'all, and you mainly, did you split time between your parents?
Not until I was 12, and then I lived with my father full on.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was a big part of my independent streak, just getting out there and exploring life and doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
without a whole lot of restrictions. So I was able to just, experience, and that comes with, its ups and its downs, but I ultimately consider it a blessing because I was able to kind of break away. In a sense, and get to know myself. And by the time I was 16, I was, spending good periods of time away from the home that I lived in and just, out exploring. And by the time I was 18, I started to develop interest in using herbs and buying organic food at a local co-op. And, I remember the first herb book that me and an old partner of mine had was Jethro Kloss's Back to Eden, and we'd be making herbs, simple herb teas, and I still remember the smell of the local co-op in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where there was, back in the days when everybody volunteered and packaged the bulk items into smaller bags, and we'd go in and you could get pre-bagged things of, nuts and raisins and all sorts of dried fruits and grains. And that was my first experience outside of a normal health food store, a normal supermarket. Yeah. And that turned me on.
The hippie dream.
Yeah. There was, herbs and spices and jars and just the smells and, bulk lotion and shampoo. And, I got into using less and making less of an impact and learning about recycling and all of the things that, we got into as
So I'm listening to this and kind of putting it together. So you had this independent streak as a teenage boy. How was school? Did school come easy, or were you rebelling in school? Or
I think I wasn't a real academic kid. I found my joy fishing by the pond, out on a canoe, roaming in the woods, connecting with nature. My first guru was Jeremiah Johnson.
The movie?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I watched that and it was all over. I wanted to take my fishing pole and go to the Rocky Mountains. And later on in life, I actually did that. Got a backpack and stuck a fishing pole in it and took a Greyhound as far as it would take me and did a lot of hitchhiking, a lot of traveling. A lot of being out there
as
on
a teenager?
the open road. Yeah, as a teenager.
Yeah, okay.
And after high school, traveling.
So you graduated high school?
Graduated high school, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I did make it through.
And
it was
you start
a vocational
college right
school.
away, or did you?
No, I didn't go to college.
Okay, all right.
No. Because by the time I was ready to go to college, I met my spiritual teacher. That's another chapter, and that became my university. More of a Vedic way of learning, but there was a fair bit of traveling.
So you finished high school and you're ready to hit the road.
I was ready to hit the road. In fact, we kind of ceremonially disconnected from society, got a van, got a dog at the local animal shelter, and drove to Berkeley, California.
We is you and who?
An old partner of mine and a good friend, one of my best friends from my teenage years. And
woman or
his name was Tom.
His name was Tom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And we traveled and we we did a lot. We did a lot of exploring nature. Mainly, we stuck to the nature spots.
Yeah,
and that was always a big draw for us. Lakes and ponds and rivers, and the Green River, the Great Lakes,
where there's less lines crossing and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Chicken, Nebraska, way out there. So, but we had fun. We got to California, and I think California was a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
The second time I wandered through Santa Cruz, I was shocked again and hitchhiked east as quick as I could. And so California didn't didn't grow on me quickly. It wasn't until I had some direction. And so...
But you lived in California at some point.
Yes, because the next time I found myself in California, because California is a big place, and I was from New England. It was smaller towns. It was just a different reality than California. Yeah. And the second time I went to California, we hitchhiked up the 1, all the way from...
Pacific Coast Highway,
We went all the way up the 1, Southern California to up to Santa Cruz.
Yep.
And then up to San Francisco. And San Francisco was just too big for my mind to comprehend at that point. I had a backpack. I didn't have much money. I got on the open road and I hightailed it as far as I could east until a good friend of mine caught me and drove me back out to Oregon. And I think Oregon was where it really hit home for me.
Okay.
Yeah. The old growth forest, the hot springs, Eugene. I loved California, and that was my, that co-ops in every corner. Yeah. We could take a 75-cent bus ride to old growth wilderness areas and hot springs and, Cougar Hot Springs and the Douglas fir forests, and just being out there that's what enticed me to stay west. And after several years more of traveling, I met my teacher, Baba Haridas, who lived in Santa Cruz, and his students had a big conference center, retreat center, that they started in the 70s with the direction of Baba Haridas. And that was where I finally settled down. Just settled down, and I felt that I could stop wandering and looking around for that which I really wanted to experience, which was within. And I had been reading spiritual books, everything from the Essene Gospels of Jesus Christ to the New Testament to the Dharmapada and the Bhagavad Gita and little Penguin Classics books that I could find on the subject. Then the Yogananda, Muktananda's Play of Consciousness,
Autobiography of a Yogi?
Yes, Autobiography of a Yogi, Christopher DeMille, Ram Dass, Be Here Now. I mean, all of those books were staples for me. I had tore through them, and I wanted to know more. And when I met Baba Haridas, that was the moment in my life where I felt that I finally stopped searching outside. I still continued to enjoy traveling from time to time, but there wasn't that longing and searching for something that there had been before.
So how long did you go through this traveling period, and how are you supporting yourself?
Well, I started traveling off and on while I was in high school.
Okay.
And then after high school until I was 22.
Okay, yeah.
So this
was
period
like your
of time
college
was very, very unstable as far as just having a solid place to live. I'd spend 6 months here,
crashing on couches,
and I never did well couch surfing. Yeah, I always liked my own space, and so wherever I stayed, I felt that I could kind of make a home there, even if it was temporary.
So you'd get a short-term lease.
I guess you could call it some couch surfing, but it wasn't quite that way.
Yeah,
it was kind of like temporary landing pads. Yeah.
Negotiate a short lease here and there and find a little sublet or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And and some relationships and And some of those relationships formed helped shape my life and look at things in a different way.
Yeah.
And we were all doing that back then.
Late 80s.
Yeah.
So it was still acceptable to hitchhike.
It was still very acceptable.
Okay, right.
Yeah, us
particularly out
Vietnam
west.
vets. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's what you were doing? No vehicle?
Sometimes we had vehicles.
Okay, yeah.
We didn't have much money to spend on the vehicles back
They'd
then.
come and go. They'd pass through.
Yeah, we'd blow head gaskets or, universal joints.
Did you have a VW van?
I never had a VW.
Okay.
I had several friends. I had done.
But you rode in some.
I had ridden in some love buses for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so this was kind of your college. It was like a self-study.
School of Hard Knocks.
School of Hard Knocks. Yeah,
and there was some hard knocks. It wasn't a comfortable period.
Yeah. Okay.
There was some lonely times. There was some fearful, some fear-provoking times and experiences. And
like what? Do you remember any?
Being in the Big Island of Hawaii. The locals weren't that hospitable there, and I can understand why now. I always say if you want to really understand in Hawaiian culture, watch The Legend of Eddie Aikau on Netflix. He was that world-renowned surfer.
Sounds like a good one.
Yeah, but it was, I was just a naive young kid, and
Yeah.
I had some good experiences in Hawaii and on Maui as well.
Uh-huh.
Later on, but as a young American hippie winding up on the Big Island without much money, camping on the beaches, it can be a little challenging.
Yeah.
But no, most of the time
Did they
it was
threaten
just
you or beat you up or anything?
no, but I think I had some close calls with just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I was a peace lover, and I tried to stay in those types of scenes.
Uh-huh. You knew how to negotiate your way out of these situations.
Yeah. I didn't like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I would have never made a good warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least not in this life. I think in a past life I may have been, but
Well, you weren't really at war. You were out to journey and quest, and then sometimes you just run into places where you run into friction, and you pick up lessons along the way with that. A buddy of mine who's a surfer, he ran into some difficult moments in Hawaii. He was telling me a very similar story.
Yeah. That's why I say watch The Legend of Eddie Aikau. Uplifting story nonetheless. He was a pretty neat guy.
Okay.
But as far as the traveling goes, it was a good time in my life. Mostly, I met some really interesting people, and I tried to do a little bit more traveling just after I met Baba Hari Das and spent several years living around him. And I always found that if I didn't have a real focus, I wasn't satisfied. Something to put my energy into.
Mm-hmm.
I always liked that.
So when you found him, that really was able to bring it into focus.
Yes,
this
absolutely.
journey. Okay, yeah.
I think at first I was just there to, cherry pick some of the best things I could and just take those exotic techniques and wander up into the mountains of Mount Shasta or somewhere like that and just sit on a mountaintop, meditate, become enlightened, and have a permanent vacation for myself. But I quickly became aware of that wasn't the case. I remember after the first year of being with Babaji, I call him Babaji, but there's a million Babajis in India, but he's my Babaji. And when I had asked Baba Hari Das, I said, "Hey, I'd like to travel for the summer and just go to Mount Shasta and meditate and live a yogi lifestyle for the summer up there." He said, "You can go to the mountain, but you won't learn yoga there." And I scratched my head and I was like, He goes, "You'll go to he says, "Yogis go to the mountains and the crows irritate them." So this is the way, my teacher was silent. He wrote on a chalkboard. So a lot of these things came through personal letters. He'd wake up every day and write letters to his disciples. And so that was in a letter. And I was so excited to hear.
So he never spoke.
He spoke, but not in the time I knew him. He's been silent for 60 years. He's 91 now, so I think maybe 61 years or something like that. Yeah.
He's been silent for 60 years?
He writes on a chalkboard, yeah. He did write on a chalkboard. He doesn't write on a chalkboard anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. Now
that
he's
is hard to imagine.
Silent. Yeah.
He's just switched off the speaking switch.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Perfect silence.
Wow.
And so, he encouraged us to practice silence, but not the way he did.
Okay.
He would say sometimes taking, temporary vows of silence, even for periods of time in a day or a day during the week, can be useful. But it wasn't a big part of his practice as far as what he was teaching us to do. He was teaching us regular practice and discipline of meditation and other forms of yoga. And so with that, a lot of our communications were via letter or just sitting in class with him. His students would read commentaries from the Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutra commentaries that he would write meticulously, and we would comb through them, all the Sanskrit words one by one, learning the sutras in a very traditional way, discussing maybe a handful of sutras in each class. And it was during these back and forths in these quiet classrooms that we got a lot of teaching, a lot more than just long-winded discourses. I mean, a few sentences on a chalkboard was concentrated information.
Wow.
He made each word count. Sometimes it would be a one-word answer.
So are you paying tuition for this education? No. Okay.
Yes, that's the beauty of it. I mean, he's one of the old guard yogis, that came over here in the early days and just wanted to teach, So you could go to Saturday morning classes. If you did Saturday morning classes for 3 months, you could be initiated into first level Kriya Yoga practices, Kriya Yoga methods, meditation. And then from there, you could practice and go up the ladder of those techniques. You could attend Bhagavad Gita class on Thursdays, Yoga Sutra classes on Tuesdays, open satsang in Santa Cruz on Sundays. He was actively teaching. You could go up 2 days a week and work on the rock crew at Mount Madonna and be up there and work with him and break rocks and build rock walls and temples and whatever they were doing up there. He loved to get his hands in the dirt, carry wood around. I mean, there was, many times that got a chance to just work alongside him. His motto was work hard, meet people without fear, meditate and play. I mean, those were the 4 credos of his path. He said, just do your practice, work hard. Karma yoga was a big practice for him. Selfless service. So we would do a lot of hard work. When I was an environmentalist, that was a certain chapter of my life, Earth First and that kind of thing. We lived out in the old growth forest in Oregon, looking for spotted owls and trying to save old growth forest. When you live up there as a young idealistic teen, you see these forests, you can't imagine anybody would ever want to cut them down. You don't take into account that people have been doing this for generations. There's, these communities are very rural and their fathers did it and their fathers did it. And you don't understand the energy that's there. And you come in and you're willing to tie yourself to a tree. And, I think that it's a noble cause, but at the same time, it's deep. It's a lot of issues there. And it was, during these times I became an environmentalist. So when I moved to Mount Madonna, I didn't want to stir my tea with a wooden tea stirrer. I didn't, I was very particular. And I think one of the first jobs that I was given was to go out with a crew and cut down some small redwood trees that were congested around certain blind corners on the road where there was children on the land there. There was many children. There was a preschool all the way through 12th grade. So Mount Madonna had a full-fledged school, Mount Madonna School. So
this is where Baba
Haridas.
Baba Haridas was, okay.
And so my first job was to go out and cut down trees with a big wild New Zealander. And it was tough. It was my first karma yoga practice. I quickly got set up in the garden.
You didn't like that? Yeah, well, that would be tough to do.
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason why they were doing it, though.
Yeah.
It was, they weren't just logging the forest down. But,
right.
They did some selective logging and milling, and it took me a few years to get around that, too. But, I understand more and more what was going on. There was a big picture there, and they really try to preserve their land. They have 350 acres of redwood forest there, and they've done a good job stewarding it and keeping it really, really nice, beautiful walking trails. It's a great place to visit.
So I can tell that this spiritual path was clear for you, and you were on it, and you were committed to it. It sounds like the way you describe it. This is a real commitment to an education.
At this point, I gave it my heart and soul. I really loved it. I mean, we'd come down to Santa Cruz on Sundays to go to satsang and do our laundry and pick up a few snacks at the health food store that we weren't getting on the land. They fed us very well up there. I mean, at the time I weighed, 15 pounds more than I do now. I mean, I worked hard and ate a ton, and I was young, and it was all vegetarian. It was a total vegetarian community. It still is, actually.
Did you feel good?
I felt great.
Yeah.
I think that as far as my health goes, I felt fantastic, full of energy. We could,
young man,
I'd get up
on
at
the path.
4 o'clock in the morning, do, an hour and a half, 2 hours of yoga, pranayama meditation. I'd do another hour or so of asana. And I mean, by the time breakfast came along, I had been up since 4:30 in the morning. And, I'd feel it though. After breakfast, you feel kind of tired. I used to
Yeah.
take the work truck out into the woods and just kind of prop my feet up on the dashboard and take a snooze for a half hour just to get my energy back and then get to work, But I was ready to hit the sack by 9 or 10 o'clock at night, every night. And so it was early to bed, early to rise, eating well.
Clean living.
And, Mount Madonna overlooked the Monterey Bay area.
Yeah.
And so you were up in the clouds. Some mornings the clouds would be low and you'd be up in a sea of clouds. So it really was. It was a Shangri-La, like a little Shambhala. And it was mine. Because I wasn't involved with the administrative aspects of the community, none of the politics of the community. Baba Haridas never lived in the community, so there wasn't too much politics around.
Where did he
who was
live?
going to do what for the guru?
Nearby? Or?
He lived in Bonnie Doon outside of Santa Cruz. He still does, and he always lived. He lives alone. He never really owned anything particular. He's a sadhu, so he was a real renunciate. Just never really had connections as far as ownership on the community. He was the guiding light, really, in the truest sense of the word, and he didn't have to be dealing with the politics. And he said that the politics began when the guru lives in the ashram, and so he really stayed true to his sadhu lifestyle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this sounds beautiful and heavenly. How long were you there?
92, 93, 94. I went to India in 94, came back and lived, in a few different places for just a few months while I was convalescing from illness. When I was in India, I got sick. And then after I got well, I went back up to live on the land for some more time. And then by 96, I was living in Oregon.
Okay.
And
so at some point,
that was the opening of a new chapter.
You get restless? Is that what happens? Or there's more teachings in the world?
I felt that period, I wanted to learn more about herbal medicine and study, and Baba Haridas was very much encouraging me to take that path. And so, in wanting to do that, I needed to leave.
Okay.
Right. And before I got really committed to my herbal studies, I did human services work and working with developmentally disabled. So I started working in group homes, and I started doing private one-on-one assisted living. And
it mid-20s?
Yeah. And up until the time I was 28, I did that work.
Okay.
And it was during that time that I really got a sense of, my desire to work with people.
Yeah.
And one-on-one. But then I started to shift away from wanting to work with the developmentally disabled, and I wanted to try to help others, because in working in that field, there's a lot of coffee, a lot of cigarettes, a lot of dark, kind of a lot of heavy, intense energy.
Oh yeah.
It's because it's hard work. But I came into it as young, idealistic, vegetarian yogi guy, right?
Yeah.
And so I was on the job bringing my textbooks, and at night after I'd put your folks to sleep and everything, I'd be studying herbology and Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and really getting into that.
Yeah. And this is mid-20s we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the time I was 28, I got married and moved to Albuquerque to study full-time with Dr. Vasant Lad.
Okay.
Ayurveda.
Right. Yeah, I've heard his name.
And I had been studying off and on, being able to take courses with him and sit in on lectures and be around him when he taught with Babaji. And I worked with one of his students, and she was my earliest mentor of Ayurveda and trained me in Ayurvedic body work. And I learned a lot from her. And then I wanted to take it deeper, so I moved to Albuquerque.
Okay. So can we talk about India for a bit? Because that sounded like that was part of the experience.
That was in 94. I went to India. I wanted to travel there alone. Baba Haridas goes every year with students. He said, you can go alone as long as you go to someplace, that he approved of. Mm-hmm. Because he didn't want me to just aimlessly be in India. Because, being young without any direction in India, And again, I was very idealistic. I mean, I went with a couple changes of clothes and a small backpack and a handful of dollars, and I was just ready to do what I just cast myself into that Indian world. So I wanted to go to Amachi's ashram in southern India. So I went to Amachi's, and back then, Amachi's ashram, you still had to be pulled out on a dugout longboat canoe. There was no bridge over the water yet. The ashram only had, I think, 6 or 7 stories at the time, but it was still a pretty big place, and it was wonderful. I mean, it was like a sea of devotion in an island of palm trees in southern India, and so I spent a good month there. Traveled to one of my favorite saints' ashrams in Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu, and that's a state in India, in southern India. And so I went to Ramana Ashrama, and Ramana Maharshi is still one of my favorite yogis in the Advaita tradition in India, the non-dualist tradition. And so I spent another few weeks at Ramana's. And then from there, I traveled to Rishikesh and then to meet my teacher in Haridwar.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I spent a few months in Haridwar living with a good friend of mine, Ram Priyadas, who was a good guru brother of mine, taught me a lot, and he taught me how to live the sadhu life in India a little bit, and showed me the ropes. And I lived in a sadhu ashram with him for a few months, and then.
So a sadhu ashram is what?
They're monks.
Monks, okay.
Yeah, but they're wandering mendicants, and they wander from place to place.
So
but they have places that they go to rest, to be fed, and to take care of themselves, to do a little self-care.
These are the ones who smear ashes on themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, matted hair, the whole deal.
Yeah, okay.
So we'd be
and
up
you
at
were
3,
one of these?
Yeah, we'd 3:00 in the morning, we'd be waking up, and I didn't get into the ashes thing. My friend would do it. It looked too austere for me. But, we'd get up early in the morning and do our practices. For me, my main focus wasn't so much the externals of that particular lifestyle. It was, I really just was enticed by the meditation practices and the ritual practices, puja, yagya, fire ceremony, things like that. So we do a lot of these practices. But my guru said to me that he goes, sadhu life looks romantic, but within a few months you'll understand. And within a few months of living with the sadhus, I became ill. It was that the weather was getting warm, and one day I went down for lunch, and I took a glass of water, and I was drinking the water out of the tap there, and it tasted like bleach, and so I went to my friend, and he asked one of the guys at the ashram, what's going on with the water, and he goes, we bleach the well because the warm weather's coming. We do it to bleach to kill the bacteria. Well, too late. Yeah, I developed amoebic dysentery, and after several weeks of trying to treat it naturally and losing a lot of weight and having chronic diarrhea and dehydration, I took conventional treatment. I got well until I think I ate the first little hot spice, greasy meal. I ate some foods that didn't agree with me. Got sick again, went on treatment. This happened several times. And then eventually it capped my journey. Yeah. I was heading into the Himalayas. I was meeting old disciples of Baba Haridas, and interviewing them, writing things down, and getting stories about my teacher that my teacher didn't really talk about himself. So I wanted to know about him. Yeah. And so I spent a good deal of time planning that journey. And then when I embarked on it, within the first few weeks, it was cut short by another bout of amoebic dysentery and secondary bacterial infection from bronchitis. So it drove me back down into the plains, eventually back to my guru's orphanage in Haridwar. And there I got to experience, I think, what I was really looking for in India those last few weeks of being there is just at the orphanage amongst the orphan children, because he has an orphanage there.
You're convalescing sick.
Yeah, and so I got well, I felt strong, gained some weight back, and I got to Delhi. I was ready to take a plane out, and I got sick again right before I got on the plane. I went to this really nice restaurant that had this great food, but it was rich with a lot of ghee and oil, and I ate food there and I got sick. I realized that the medicines that I was taking were hard on my liver, and every time I took fatty food, I would get sick again. And I was just on the edge of this amoebic dysentery. And so it was my system was really breaking down. Yeah. When I got back to the States, I healed myself doing Chinese medicine and living an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And I was doing Chinese herbs and doing the Ayurveda and yoga. That's where I really got strict with my diet. And I think it was really through the diet, just eating very simply and allowing my digestive fire to strengthen again. And doing asanas. I was very into the yoga at the time. And those yoga postures aren't as big of a practice for me now, although I do some. But back then, it was a way that I was able to strengthen myself and get real healthy, real fast, and the pranayamas. And so...
the breathing techniques.
Yeah.
So that brings up something that I should have mentioned right from the get-go. I guess you weren't born with the name Vishnu Das.
No, I wasn't.
You weren't?
No,
yeah. Okay. No. When did you pick that up?
Baba Haridas gave me that name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
He named me Vipul Chandra. Vipul meant full and Chandra meant moon. So Vipul Chandra was a name that I carried for a couple of years. But then I took, sadhu vows, monk vows, which, I maintained for some time, but not, I eventually let those vows go. I wasn't a monk. I wanted to be, I was enticed by that, or what I thought that was, what it would be like. But he gave me the name Vishnu Das at that initiation period. And I kept that name.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's the name that I use today.
And how old were you when that happened?
24. It was right before I went to India.
Okay.
Yeah, he gave me that name, and that was when I took Diksha, or initiation as a Vairagi Saddhu.
Okay.
And but I still follow that path, but as a householder. In renunciation, it just takes different forms.
Yeah.
It really is the same path.
Yeah.
Whether we live he says it's hard to be a renunciate in America. It's like keeping butter from melting near a fire. And he also says that monks there have a society, and they're respected and they're taken care of as they get older amongst other fellow monks and by the ashrams that are supported by the householders. Here, householder life is more supportive because we have our partners and we have someone to go it with. Yeah. My uncle once said it's too big a world to go it alone, and I understand that, and I value relationship, and it is a certain renunciation, even being in relationship, because you streamline your desire into one relationship, and you find satisfaction, and you're able to fulfill the desire in a controlled sense. It's not just this unbridled desire that just leads us in the way of the senses everywhere we go. We become satisfied. Babaji used to say that that one who tastes many tastes are satisfied with simple food. And so if, that simple food is that relationship. And if we're satisfied with that, then we no longer have to waste a lot of energy searching for those objects of desire. We know we have them, we know we're loved, and our desires are at our fingertips, and we're satisfied with that. So it lessens the desire.
So it fits into your American heritage and your upbringing to
and my nature and desire to have partnership.
Yeah.
So those that live a renunciation, the life of a renunciate, if they still have tendencies, or if they have, I should say, not still, because the object isn't to be a monk. The option is to be at peace. I mean, the object of the practice is to be at peace. And if it's conducive for you to be at peace as a renunciate, then it would be more beneficial if that is true renunciation of householder life, meaning that you don't have the desire for it, that the desire for it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Okay. So you were able to tap into your true nature and to your desires and what really fit in with. You were able to discover who you were and where your journey in this lifetime was going to be.
Absolutely. My teacher was very happy when I decided not to be a monk. I think that was the only time in my life with him that I felt like he was overjoyed at my experience. He said, "I'm glad you've made a decision from your own heart," meaning true to my nature, not wanting to emulate somebody else. Yeah. Whether it be my guru brother who was a monk, or whether it was my guru, or other lives of saints that I had read that wandered the jungles, and all that. Yeah.
So I wonder if you had to go through all this renunciation and all this practice of austerity to discover what your true nature was, perhaps.
Yeah. And it helped me to become content just being with myself, which at the time I felt that was beneficial for me. Yeah. It was a good way to. It strengthened tendencies that still are with me today.
How do you say it? Ayurveda?
Ayurveda.
Okay.
Or Ayurvedic.
Okay. So this deep spiritual journey takes you from the name Ocean to Vishnu Das, eventually, and now you are deep in this studies of Indian spirituality and yoga, and you've been to India, gotten sick, and have come back and have found a path in herbology. And it had always been an interest. And then you ended up down in Albuquerque, you said.
Yeah, I got married.
Okay.
I was living on the West Coast, and I decided I wanted to go move closer to my family.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for just a second. By the way, how does your family feel about all this journeying?
They have been interested. I think at first I was interesting. I perked their curiosity with my excitement and enthusiasm with whatever I was doing. You asked me how I made money. I'd made crafts. Different things, and they would always be interested in that kind of stuff. And then I eventually, got into the herbal medicine. They were interested in that, and they, eventually got them all to start recycling and thinking about food in a different way. And my sister Mary Ellen became a yoga teacher eventually. Now my other sister Kathy has become a yoga teacher now. Okay. Her and I are close. We share recipes, and she's very enthusiastic about spirituality, and as Mary Ellen was, and so
they were curious about your journeys here.
Yeah, they were curious, and and my mom was too. And my mom eventually met Baba Haridas. And, was very moved and touched by him. I mean, he was. I think she was a little nervous meeting him, but when you meet him, he was very comfortable and easy to be around. So they felt pretty good about it, and it grew on them, and they developed more and more interested in those types of things, especially as they became more regular place, So then I decided to move back to closer to my family for a while. That didn't last long. I moved to Vermont in the wintertime, got married very quickly, actually. And then I moved to Albuquerque to study with Dr. Ladd. Otherwise, I don't think I ever would have lived there. The place grew on me. I loved the desert. Yeah. And we lived up next to the mountains. My former wife and I and our child was born there, Shanti. And so we lived there for several years, and then we moved from Albuquerque after looking at the map, deciding where to move to. We had some fellow disciples of my ex-wife's teacher who lived here. So, and I had a fellow Ayurveda student that lived here as well. So we moved to Asheville in 2001, and I opened up a practice immediately. I had already been practicing in Albuquerque on my own and at the Ayurvedic Institute. And so I opened my own practice here. Yeah.
So, how long did it take you to become an Ayurveda practitioner?
Well, the Ayurvedic program in Albuquerque, when I attended it was referred to as Ayurvedic Studies program.
Okay.
And that was the first year. And then they had the Gurukula program. So I had attended the Gurukula program for a couple of years. And while I was, during those 2 years, I also became a massage therapist. After my first year of study with Dr. Ladd, he went to India for the winter, and I went to a massage school program. And it was actually a school of natural therapeutics. We learned a lot about health, diet, lifestyle, real strong focus on energy work, energy healing, and with the polarity system, shiatsu, craniosacral, as well as deep tissue body work, neuromuscular, and Swedish massage. So it was a real strong focus in a few modalities of body work and energetic healing. And then I took that and went into working at the Ayurvedic Institute and continuing the study with Dr. Ladd in the Gurukula program. And then I, after completing that and passing oral examination, because back then Dr. Ladd did only oral exam.
Okay.
And it was a rigorous study. There wasn't a real defined curriculum. You had to just know everything he ever taught you.
Yeah.
And he'd just ask you in whatever way he wanted.
Okay.
And so it was challenging.
Yeah.
That style of learning has since passed. I mean, they have now the Ayurvedic Studies program too. It's a more defined curriculum. Dr. Ladd still pulls the rabbit out of the hat. You never know what's going to come each day. You can't hem him down. He's really in the moment. And so it's the same quality of learning, just a little bit of a different package.
Okay. So you went through this rigorous schooling and moved to Asheville to establish your own practice out here after picking it out specifically, probably for the qualities of that Asheville represents and represented.
Yeah, and I mean there was a strong herbal focus here. And before I had just studied full time with Dr. Ladd, and while I was still just in the midst of my Ayurvedic studies, I did some apprenticing with Michael Tierra in exchange for enrolling in his school, the American School of Herbalism. And there was a whole slew of really good Chinese medicine doctors teaching at that school: Roy Upton, Christopher Hobbs, Michael Tierra, some local herbalists, people who are really good with local mushrooms and plants. And so that's where I fell in love with herbal medicine. And then when I started to study with Dr. Ladd, that is what really hit it for me. I loved the herbal medicine aspect. I love to cook already. So nutrition and herbs became my focus. Herbal nutrition and other forms of nutrition.
Okay. For our listeners who are new to the Ayurveda discipline, if you could summarize in a thousands and thousands year old system in just a few words, how do you do it? How do you explain it?
I would say that Ayurveda is ancient common sense.
Okay.
Most people in India, up until not that long ago, lived relatively rural.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, even today, a lot of people don't have access to healthcare. The mother and the kitchen pharmacy and the tradition that's passed on from mother to daughter in relation to how to use spices. I see this with Indian clients. They will treat their children with herbs and spices in the kitchen. And they'll say, well, is it okay if I use this spice and this spice and this spice? I make a tea and I mix this with their food. And I'm like, that's right out of the Ayurvedic handbook. Absolutely. I would say that Ayurveda is right out of the cookbook. Sometimes they won't even refer to it as Ayurveda. This is what they were brought up with. This is what their mother and their grandmothers gave.
Just part of the culture.
It's a part of the culture.
Yeah.
And
it works.
And it works. And a lot of it has to do with just basic common sense stuff. I'd seen similar types of common sense stuff in Mexico. And there's just these little home remedies, things that people just know. So that's one aspect of Ayurveda. It's just that real common sense. And then when you get into the clinical practice, a lot of what we're recommending falls back into that simple home remedy. That doesn't mean that everything, serious diseases can simply be treated with home remedy and self-care. But that's what maintains health. That's what brings back mild disturbance back into balance.
Yeah.
Much the same way we would use over-the-counter pharmaceuticals today for our run-of-the-mill issues, they use herbs, spices, and and other types of healthy habits and routines. And the benefit of that is that they're not just suppressing the symptoms, but they're working on the habits and tendencies and cravings and things that lead us to imbalance to begin with. I'm not saying that if somebody needs an antihistamine, if they're just absolutely miserable with allergies and they can't sleep at night and they haven't slept for 2 weeks and they take a few Claritin and feel better. But if you just go on taking a medicine that suppresses symptoms and you don't actually treat the reason why you feel the way you do, then it complicates things. And so I don't practice alternative medicine. I say I have an integrative approach. I have a complementary approach, I should say. It complements whatever else people are doing, but the Ayurvedic path is about a mindfulness and awareness, and increasing our awareness of how our actions lead to our current state of health or imbalance. Mm-hmm. How did the food that we ate yesterday feel for us today? I often think about that when I go out to eat. And I notice, I woke up in the middle of the night with dry mouth. Am I really excessively thirsty? Is my elimination good the next day? Do I have blemish on my nose? It's like you can tell really quick how something burns in your system. Yeah. And how your organs of elimination are able to process that food. And so when we do this when we live this way, we become more aware. So we can walk the edge a little bit. We can play the edge. We can have the Christmas cake and the birthday, the Christmas cookie and the birthday cake, and we can, we don't have to be rigid and strict about everything. Right? Or we don't even have to be rigid or strict. We find balance, and then we know when we veer from it.
We're able to observe it.
But if we dumb our system down, that we often don't know what we're doing affects us.
So it's a training of the total system, the mind and body, to be aware of what we're putting in and how it affects us.
Not just in our mouths, but also in our senses. What types of media we're taking in, what types of books we read, what types of relationships we have. All of these things are food for the indriyas, for the senses. And if we regularly take into our senses those things that lead us into greater states of imbalance, then they form metabolic waste, either on a physical level or a psychological level.
Well, that speaks to what we call in the West the mind-body connection, which is totally mysterious to Western medicine. We know nothing about it. I mean, we know little bits of evidence of the proof of it, but we have no system for explaining it or understanding it in Western medicine. Yeah. And yet we know intuitively and from experience that it's real, and it's also a big part of what goes on in psychiatry. In my practice is talking to folks about the media we ingest and, the relationships that we cultivate and how that impacts us. But I like the way that you speak of also how it impacts our body. What goes into the mind impacts the body and vice versa, and it's all interconnected. There's a cohesion and a coherence in the Ayurvedic system that is just fascinating to me.
Well, the mind-body complex, we call it ahankar. Okay. Which can be referred, in some senses of the word, is ego. Although the ego, there's more meaning in the word ego than, and ahankar doesn't quite get all of that. Ahankar has its own meanings as well. But ahankar is that ego sense or that individual sense of self. Uh-huh. It is that which forms around the sense of I. Yeah. And much like in the Western psychological field, the ego isn't something to be destroyed or suppressed. It's something to be cultivated. It's something to be understood and purified in a sense. We call it sattva buddhi. It's something when we develop a purity of our sense of self, when we develop a healthier sense of self, then our health will blossom. And so Ayurveda works on that level of ahankar. of that individual self. And this body-mind complex, if it's healthy, if the apparatus, or in a sense, is healthy, then the spirit can flow through this physical vehicle. Just like that's when you have a diesel, you want to change the oil on a regular basis so the car runs a long life and the car will run smoother and you won't spend as much money. Well, if we take care of our bodies, we don't spend as much money on our on health care. We don't have to take as many expensive medications or herbal supplements or what have you. We take care of ourselves and we will be happier for it. So Ayurveda has always understood the value of taking care of the individual.
The car metaphor comes up again and again. Yeah. It's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I get it all the time. People want to come in, they want to cleanse. I say, well, before we talk about cleansing, what makes the engine dirty?
Yeah.
Because we can cleanse today and then tomorrow you wind right back where you started.
And that can be dangerous.
And it can just be fruitless.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I didn't start cleansing. The type of cleansing yoga emphasizes is start eating a healthy diet, start to do practices that purify the physical body, in the subtle body, through meditation, through pranayama, through asana, through any forms of good, healthy exercise. My guru was a fan of any form of exercise and athleticism. He loved it. Get busy, keep the body healthy and happy, whether it's basketball, volleyball. He'd often write me letters saying, our volleyball team at Mount Madonna is state champions,
Yeah.
He would love that,
Yeah,
and,
right.
Indians loved, they're sportsmen,
Yeah.
and so they love that, whether it's cricket or any kind of game. Yeah, it was just a part of the way he was, so taking care of ourselves is an important thing. And,
right.
And it still is for us today,
Yeah. So do you have folks who come to you for chronic illnesses, as we'd refer to it, in Western medicine, or is it folks who come to you for acute illnesses?
All ends of the spectrum.
Psychological?
All ends of it.
Yeah, okay.
I basically get, I don't like to call it the backwash of the medical system because it sounds so negative, but I get people who've run the gamut.
Okay.
They've run the gamut, sometimes the gauntlet, and they're coming to my door because nothing else has worked.
Yeah.
And I say, well, it may not be that stuff is useless to do. It just means that it may mean that there's a deeper cause that's not being addressed.
Right.
And so medication, whether it's herbal, supplementary, or pharmaceutical, everything is going to run an uphill battle unless you address the root cause. Now, addressing the root cause of something doesn't mean that it's just going to go away. But it may mean that over the course of weeks, months, or even years, or even decades, you can slowly start to improve your health. I've experienced that from my own health experience, and where it took me a long time before I noticed physical symptoms change for the reasons I came to Ayurveda, but I noticed other benefits, and I understood the validity of it. It's just like with yoga meditation. You may not get samadhi right away. And if you do, it's usually beginner's luck, and then you wind up with yourself sitting there on the cushion, bored and fidgety and everything that you feel and experience, and for years and decades. But through the study, that's why sutras were studied in Buddhism and in the Vedic tradition, is through the study, through the methodical study and understanding with our intellect and fortifying ourselves that way, we understand logically that this stuff makes sense. It makes good sense, and we dedicate our lives to it.
Yeah.
And so whenever anybody comes, I mean, I lose a lot of patients just on the phone before they come in because they ask, when will I get well? How long will it take? They want to hear that, and I don't feed that. I say, healing process is very individual, and I have seen all ends of the spectrum, so I can't tell you how long it will take, but I can tell you that over the years of practicing Ayurveda, I see that people get well more often than not, and in ways they never would have imagined. And I said, so I encourage people to adopt the Ayurvedic path as a part of their healing process and learn from it. It will always benefit you, regardless of the outcome of one specific thing that you have going on, but we'll make our best effort to treat that. But in Ayurveda, we don't treat that. We treat the whole person with that. It doesn't mean that we just treat the whole person and put the diseased process to the side. We recognize the disease process. We even identify and maybe even label the disease process, but our treatment isn't on the disease process. We call it kaya chikitsa. It is body therapy, the whole body, all of the sheaths of our human experience.
Whether it's the specific system that's afflicted, but it goes beyond that.
It goes into all systems because all systems are integrated, and it goes into all aspects of ourselves, both physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. All of these are touched upon.
Yeah.
And they always are, as you know, doing what you do. People come in, and we are psychosomatic beings.
Oh, yeah.
Regardless to whether or not we have a philosophy in the medical establishment that supports that claim. I mean, I think now we do with integrative and functional medicine approaches. They've come to some of the same conclusions that Ayurvedic doctors have, because we're still looking at the same situation. All we need to do is wake up and see it.
Yeah.
And it's happening. I know really good, open-minded allopathic doctors or Western doctors that think along the same lines I do, express things in a similar way that Ayurveda does.
Yeah,
and we are merging. These systems, just like religions and spiritual paths, are all merging.
Yeah.
Not into one. I don't think that we all have to have one way, one flavor, lollipop.
Right.
I just think that we have a mutual connection and respect, and we may have different ways that we express it, different languages and coatings on it, but
different lenses through which seeing the
but
the
there's a beauty of seeing
on.
the universality, because whether it's Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, or whatever kind of system or approach that we, like you said, the lens that we look at it through, beyond that, we're just seeing this complex and mysterious processes of life.
Yeah, I mean, it's infinitely complex, and yet we can gain more and more understanding of it the more attention we pay through the proper means. One question that I imagine some folks are having is, do you have to be a vegetarian to see an Ayurvedic doctor?
If I was to say yes, I'd lose all my business because paleo is so popular.
Oh, yeah, right.
I have not met a Paleolithic person yet, so I don't know what they ate. But I can imagine it wasn't that far from the average, from the ancient jungle-dwelling Indian. And you have to understand that Ayurveda is thousands of years old. The study of Ayurveda comes from this ancient tradition. This Charaka Ayurveda is this, over 3,500 years ago. All of these sutras were passed down in oral tradition. And even till today, you could burn all of the sutras, and there will be a doctor that will be able to, a practitioner that will be able to chant these scriptures, right?
Chant them. Wow.
Yeah.
Memorize. That's deep knowledge.
Very deep knowledge. And so there is a wealth of knowledge that comes out of the Ayurvedic tradition that stems far back into history. And if you study Ayurveda, you quickly become aware that they didn't have concept of so much that you're vegetarian or non-vegetarian. Okay, Ayurveda is a system of medicine. Sure, there were vegetarians around. Buddhism Buddhists were big supporters of Ayurveda. They were big supporters of the idea of ahimsa and nonviolence. And so they believed from early on that taking less life is always better.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that we could subsist on simple, nourishing, and balanced foods without taking life, we can do that.
Yeah.
But does that mean that meat foods are not nutritious in balancing to certain people at certain times? Yes, absolutely. Do I say that meat should always be our medicine? I think, well, if you take the life of something to eat it, it may be for survival. And for survival, that's medicine. And we can be vegetarians today because we have the opportunity to be vegetarians today. Back in ancient times, we may or may not have had that luxury.
Right.
And so my philosophy is traditional Ayurvedic philosophy, which is we do what is best for us. We do that not selfishly, but for our own health and well-being. Mm-hmm. And if that means having some meat protein in the diet in order to maintain health, well, then that's what it means. If that means eat more vegetarian food and reduce meat proteins, then that's what it means. Mm-hmm. But one of the most important things I think should be taken into account with nutrition is that the meat diet that we ate hundreds of years ago, or even 100 years ago, is like, let's say here in the mountains of North Carolina, was much different. Because the animals that we had were hunted or we had to raise them. In order to raise them, it took a lot of work. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort. And one of the biggest problems with disease today, with the degradation of our health, is that we put more into our body and we do less to get it.
Yeah. I read something where it used to be we had to do all this work to hunt for the food and then we'd eat it, and now we eat, and then we have to do all the work to burn it off.
Yeah.
We've got it like reversed.
CrossFit and paleo.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. We want to eat more bacon, we got to do more CrossFit.
Yeah.
You know, the way I look at it is if we exercise to half our capacity, we exercise for longevity. So we take care of our connective tissues. We don't break them down and feel like we have to build them up, have large amounts of certain kinds of foods that build them up. We don't break them down too much in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Healthy exercise.
Healthy exercise balanced with healthy diet.
Yeah.
And if that is an omnivorous diet, then great. But fruits and vegetables and whole grains and sensible amounts of any kinds of meat protein, but more importantly than anything, just having a sense of gratitude, understanding how much nature, not just from the animal, but water and soil and energy and fossil fuels go in to the commodities that we pick up in the health food store.
Yeah.
So trying to support local farming, trying to support our local farms here in the area.
Yeah.
If we eat meat, and we get meat from Hickory Nut Gap Farm, and we get some of their farms or locally raised vegetables, and this have a greater impact, not just on ourselves, but on the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing that's just so intriguing and it rings nice to my ears is that Ayurveda, there's all this mystical and magical, infinite complexity underneath it all, but also it's grounded in all these common sense principles which apply here in America. Just as well as they do in India. These principles that you're talking about are principles that we all advocate for. Yeah.
There's a concept now here, we call it urban homesteading, right? People are starting to learn how to live a simpler life. And I say that Ayurveda moved away from the village, and I think it started to degrade to some degree. Any system of indigenous medicine, the further it moves back from indigenous lifestyle, the more degradation it will take place.
Yeah.
But now,
and once it's lost, how do you get it back?
So and if we look at India, I mean, the population and the amount of food and the quality of the food. I mean, it's becoming very difficult.
Yeah,
ecologically there, and here in the United States too. But what I see happening here in the United States is that there is this emphasis of sustainability, of not just how much gugulo or how much kutki or other herbs that are endangered can we harvest out of the Himalayas and other areas of India, and there's a devastation of local plants, local traditional plants in Ayurveda they're becoming wiped out. So there is a real strong emphasis here in the United States on sustainability of plants. Mm-hmm. And those of us, there are some good companies like Banyan Botanicals, Organic India, that have gone back and to India and promoted organic farming and have been working to bring back endangered species of plants and make them available to us practitioners again in a sustainable and organic way. And so Ayurveda has given us a blessing by giving us this ancient wisdom. And the teachers of Ayurveda, that have come here so graciously shared this information with us, then we can give back by offering Ayurveda a hand up in a modern world. Because we have a bit of a head start industrially. And so I say to people, buy bulk food, make homemade food, use less supplements, know the herbs and supplements you use well, use less of them, and know that your body knows how to heal. You don't need to just take hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes to have good digestion. Consider when you eat, how much you eat, what quality of the food you do eat, how do you feel when you eat it.
Well, these are all important things to consider, and it's part of that process that we call mindfulness.
Absolutely.
And it's ever growing. And I like the way you describe it, and I like how your discipline emphasizes that first and foremost and is accessible to everyone here. Ayurveda is fantastic.
I think so. Yeah, I'm in agreement with it, and I find that more than a philosophical system of health that you have to adopt and follow solely by. I say that there's so many philosophies. Ayurveda developed when there was no philosophy for it. There was just a way of life, and as that way of life changed for people as they started living in closer quarters and villages. The rishis, the sages that lived more rural, they lived more in the jungles, more in solitude, and they had a deeper connection with nature that was being lost. Imagine back then, you know? And so their intention was to bring that simplicity and that mindfulness and that connection with nature to the villages. And so it kept the villagers in contact with the seasons, with the planets, with all of nature, with the animals. And that's why I say, they did use animals as food, but they had a deep reverence and connection. In the Peruvian traditions, they call it sacred reciprocity. In the Andean culture, a deep respect for nature. So you are absolutely connected to and fused with whatever it is that you're using, whether it's the plant, whether it's the animal. That type of respect is what I think this ancient system tries to cultivate. Is where do we fall in the great scheme of things? Not just what can we get for ourselves, but how can we play a part in this whole process and movement with nature? And that was reflected in even the fire ceremony, where a certain amount of grain harvested was given back to the devas. And the devas really represented all of these energies that are in nature. Their gods that they would worship really were the wind, the sky, the water, the plants, the rocks, the trees, similar to Native American concepts. They were aligning with those principles as they harvested their grain and offered it back. And people today say, well, grain is good, grain is bad, which way should I go? I say, we abuse grain, and then the effects of our disconnect, our lack of connection, proper connection with that grain, not just how much we're eating, but our farming of it, our offering of it, our connection to it. So that's affected, and that affects our Agni, our fire, our deep, our metabolic fire, our transformative fire. I don't think the Hopis had a hard time with corn.
Right.
Okay? Look at the way that they lived their life in relationship to corn. Before the horse came, how many buffalo did Indians eat? Not much. There was less strife amongst the tribes too. But the quicker we could get that food, the quicker we could travel distance, conquer territory.
Right.
And these things are just a part of life. They're a part of
they
history.
They are a part of life and
our,
part of change.
Yeah.
And here we are in a podcast format, talking into microphones and recording digitally to be shared on the World Wide Web and all that. But maybe it's this technology that can help us align better through connecting people and, speaking truth to power to these principles, which need to be first and foremost in our priority list. And so, speaking, of technology, how do folks get a hold of you? You've got a presence on the web and all that.
I have a website, bluelotusayurveda.com, and it's an informative website. There, I have a blog as well, Ayurvedic Herbology East and West.
Okay, cool.
That blog is on the internet as well as on the website. And I've written a couple couple books. One is the Ayurvedic Herbology East and West, which is a study of Ayurvedic herbology of Eastern and Western plants.
Yep.
And another simple, I say the easiest cookbook on the face of the planet for Ayurveda. Just simple, no frills, just how to eat good without thinking about it too much.
Yeah.
Which was one thing that Babaji used to say: eat good and forget about it. Eat a good diet and then forget about it. Don't worry about it. Don't live your food philosophy, down to every little aspect of your being. You develop good habits of eating, so you don't have to think about eating so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
It becomes second nature.
Yeah, we don't need to obsess over it.
Yeah, like when you meditate, then you don't talk about your meditation experiences all day. You live it.
Yeah. You
live your meditation experience, and that's the way I say you hold Ayurveda like you would a little frog in your hand. Just tight enough to where it doesn't jump out, and not so much you crush it. I learned that from my daughter as she would catch peeper frogs when she was a little girl.
Yeah.
She used to tame frogs that way, and I said that's the Peeper Frog Sutra. So that's how I relax the effort around the practice of nutrition.
And you're a teacher as well.
Yes, we have a school here in Asheville. It's a 600-hour first-year training program. It's labeled Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor Program. It's a first-year training. It gets people in the door of helping people with diet and lifestyle and simple home remedy. And then students can take that further. And there's more and more in-depth programs for second-year training. I do offer mentorship for students that come out of first-year training or graduate from other schools at whatever level, to help mentor them to practice to the degree that they're trained to, and in an effective way. I learned a lot about my clinical practice through mentoring in a private one-on-one type way. So I like to provide that to students as well.
Yeah. Well, Brooke has just been engrossed in her studies and is loving the program, and I'm really enjoying following along vicariously.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good. So thank you so much for your teaching.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I've really enjoyed it.
A little trip down memory lane.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing your personal story. You really lived it, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so appreciate you coming out, and looks like the rain's let up.
Good. I can get back to my clinic and get back to work.
Get back to your work day. All right. Well, thanks, Vishnu.
All right. You take care.
Well, that was my conversation with Vishnu Das. Wow, what a life. What a story. He's doing great work in his Ayurveda practice. Really enjoyed talking to him, and I hope you enjoyed it too. We've got a name here on the podcast now, Anecdotal Evidence. You can find it on iTunes and on my website, danieljohnsonmd.com. So again, I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Give me a holler with any feedback, any ideas for the podcast. And thanks for tuning in. Signing off for now, it's Daniel Johnson, MD. Take care.